Hi, how are you? Okay, this is a little different of a format than what we usually do because I didn't bring my phone with me. I'm having some Zoom issues. So, hello and welcome to Government 6316, the Politics of Policymaking, Home Edition. We are going to be creative today, and I've got a whiteboard, like a actual piece of paper that we're going to use. And we're going to focus on the social construction of target populations and intersectionality. But there are two really important things. Let's begin with a acknowledgement of country. I can't share screen in this model, so we just have to sort of dance with the devil as we go through here. Just bear with me while I'm pulling up PowerPoint. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather today, Australia, and recognize their continuing connection to land, water, and culture. I am currently on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I further acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which you are on, since this week the entire class is remote because of the inclement weather. I would further acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which you are on and pay respects to their elders, past, present, and future. This is and will always be Aboriginal land. So we are going to dance between slides. Now, fortunately, I think we're doing better this way. Fortunately, you already have the slides for this week's lecture, so you can follow along with me as we go through. But that's a little bit different than what we usually do. So I would just ask you to go to Canvas now and open the slides and follow along with me, or pause the video and you can do it that way. I'm trying to adjust the camera as we go here, which is a little bit tricky. There we go. So we are going to do a few things today. Let me see if I can. Let me just make sure I can't. No, I can't share the screen on YouTube. But what I'd like to do is note that this is week 2, and we're looking at, again, it's slide number 4. If you're looking at the slides, we're on week 2, agenda setting and identities. So we've already done that. Next week, we discuss the policy brief. And so I want you to think right now about a topic that you care about, because you're going to follow this topic for all 3 assessments. And this is really important. So if I pick gay rights, I might pick the religious discrimination bill, for instance. And so I look at that for all 3. I look at it as a policy brief, I look at it as a problem, and I look at it relative to the solution. If I picked climate change adaptation in Lismore, which is having a terrible time at the moment, my heart really goes out to Lismore, then you would be looking at a policy brief on Lismore. Then you would be looking at the problems associated with climate change adaptation in Lismore, and you'd be looking at the solutions in Lismore. Does that make sense? So whatever issue you pick is going to be really, really important, because that has a knock-on effect for all 3 assessments that you have this semester. And the goal here is that you would not just do sort of 3 random papers this semester, but that you would dig down and your level of analysis will increase the more time you spend looking at climate change adaptation and Lismore. So what you want to do is find a topic and find a location. And I want you to be more narrow than less narrow. We can always go wider if we need to. But if you said to me, I want to look at Ukrainian policy relative to Russia, that would be huge. If you said, I want to look at climate change adaptation in Lismore, that is much more manageable. And then I'd probably say, what exactly is the climate change adaptation plan you want to look at? And you'd say, oh, it's a set of 12 things that they've been working on for the last decade. And I'd say, okay. So you find your issue relative to a location, and we're trying to narrow down the scope. Okay, so I want you to think about those things, and you're going to bring that with you to next week's class. All right? Okay, great. So then we'll work on drafting a policy brief next week. What is public policy? Do you remember what we said? For each class, I'm going to do a little mini recap at the start of the class. And I'm going to just remind you, or we'll do a banter where I ask you questions and you sort of respond. I think that's a little bit more exciting than having a one-dimensional model. But for the purposes of today and the storm, remember there were 8 elements to the policy process. There was what goes into the policy process, right? So there's inputs like laws and bills and lobbying and special interest groups and things like that. And we're going to talk about all of that. But that's sort of the one that is the easiest to talk about, the stuff that goes into public policy. And remember that one of our big takeaways from last week was that most of public policy is what is not happening. So there's only a very small sliver of stuff that actually happens. But the type of stuff that does happen is divided into these 8 categories. So it's what goes into policy, what comes out of policy, the distributive model, which is what we're going to talk about today. So how is it that when I create a category of domestic violence or violators or refugees or asylum seekers or same-sex couples, that there is a relationship that's created between the individual and the state? And that is what we're talking about in this class. If you're like, Chris, it sounds like identity politics. It's not about identity politics. It's about the relationship between the individual and the state, which dominates in different relationships, allocate benefits and allocate burdens to those people through the policy process. And that's what we're looking at in this class. So again, the first policy is what goes into the policy. The second is what comes out of the policy process, the distributive model, the social construction of target populations, intersectionality. The third is street-level bureaucrats. And remember, street-level bureaucrats are defined by 2 variables. They are front-facing, so they're like police officers, doctors, nurses, teachers, city clerks, case workers, social workers, Centerlink staff. They're very front-facing. And the second is that they have a high degree of discretion. And so they wield a lot of power, these street-level bureaucrats. The fourth is governmentality, which is the self-regulation. Remember, this is the example of you're sitting at the red light and you look right and you look left and there's no one there. And yet you sit dutifully. And that kind of self-regulation, the power of the state to get you to sit at a red light. It's just a light. There's nothing magical about it, but it's got this power that's going to stop you and every car behind you. Then the next is private governance. And we talked about this about McDonald's building roads in Africa or building roads in Perth. The fact that Moody's sets the bond rating, and hospitals and teachers set their own standards for what makes a good teacher or what makes a good doctor. This is all private governance, where the private enterprise creates massive influxes in the policy process, right? In how we teach, in what makes a teacher a teacher. That's a policy, or a doctor, or plane a plane. And those things are determined usually by their own interest group. And the next is the sixth, which is supranational organizations like the World Health Organization or the World Trade Organization. And we talked about how the WHO is obviously a really big one and has played a huge role. The UN is playing a huge role right now in Ukraine, in the conflict with Russia, the war with Russia, the invasion by Russia. And then the seventh was personnel, that people matter. There is a intangible quality to having gender equity in a cabinet or in government or in a workplace environment. And so that's really powerful. And so personnel matters. And the last one was foreign agents. And that is sort of foreign states, the way in which right now we're seeing foreign states influencing the policy of different countries. The United States just did a no-fly zone for Russian after Finland did, and after a number of other countries did. And I'm sure they were going to do it anyway. But the issue is that it's sort of what we call policy diffusion, right? When one country does it, it leads to another country doing it, it leads to a policy transfer. Another country does it, and maybe you adjust it a little bit along the way, but it sort of spreads like wildfire. And that's sort of a foreign influence. So those are the 8 different kinds of public policy that we've been talking about in this class, and that we're going to talk about for the whole 13 weeks. And this is week 2. So we have 11 weeks more to go. It's tons of time. You're going to have a great, enjoyable experience, I promise. So let's take a look. I'm just dancing between the way YouTube is set up. When you do the recording, you do a live stream, and then I think you edit it afterwards. And it won't give me the PowerPoint at the same time. So if you see my eyes darting around, that's what is going on. Okay. So I'm just one more reminder that we're doing the policy brief next week. So please focus on that. Another reminder that the policy brief is due week 5. That's the 23rd of March at 11:59 p.m. So that's week 5. The policy brief is due. It's 1750 words. There's already a model of it in the week 3 module of the reading discussion section on Canvas. Okay, so we also talked about the 3 faces of power, but what I want to talk about today is the social construction of target populations. And what I'm going to do is take a marker in my board, and I did sort of like an old-fashioned teacher, where I went to the store and I got markers. And let's have a conversation using these markers in this board and see how it works. Okay. So we start with the box. And so the social construction of target populations functions across 2 axes. Okay. The first is positive and negative perception. and the second is high and low power. So what we've done is we've gone positive and negative, high and low. And what Schneider and Ingram say, and I'll switch to a different marker because this one's a little thick, it shows red. What Schneider and Ingram would say is that for groups that have both a positive construction and high power, those are called advantaged. So we have advantaged. And so essentially what we're talking about here is a group of people that have a lot of power and we like them a lot, right? They're positively constructed. So this social construction of target populations positively constructs people across power and perception. So they have a lot of power and we like them a lot. Who do we, let's leave this here. Who do we like and give a lot of power to? Any ideas? I can think of one. Think of celebrities. Okay, celebrities. We also do it with the military. Not as much in Australia as we do in America, but it's sort of we give them medals and they get awards and they're sort of, the governor general, and we put them in charge of things like COVID. So the military plays a sort of an outsized role in situations. Anybody else? I'd like to say scientists. I'm not sure that's true. So we like them a lot and we give them a lot of power. Celebrities, actors, sports people, military people. We like them. Police. Do we like police? It sort of functions on this spectrum, right, between positive and negative. So maybe police are somewhere in the middle. So we put police here. And so let's keep moving and we'll keep filling it in as we go. Then we've got people who have a lot of power, but who are negatively constructed. So these are people with a lot of power, but we don't like them. So we call these people, or Schneider and Ingram call these people contenders. So we don't like them, but we give them a lot of power. Who don't we like, but we give a lot of power to? Big business. Newspapers. Media. Mining companies. We're not singling out any individual people, but we've got big business, newspapers, media, mining companies here under this contender label that we've got. So we've got that here today. Okay, let's keep moving and we'll keep filling it in. Then we've got people that we like a lot, but we don't give them any power. Who do we like in society? These dependents, as Schneider and Ingram would call them. These dependents. So we like them. We shower them with affection, but we don't give them power. So now maybe this is, we go back to some of these street level bureaucrats, right? Nurses. Where do doctors go? We like doctors and we give them a lot of power. So I'm going to put doctors back up in advantaged. Okay, so then we had dependents, which was nurses, teachers. We like teachers. Maybe we like teachers. Youth. What about youth? Do we like youth? Do we really like youth? We like children. Okay. Well, we don't give them a lot of power, so we'll put children. So we've got nurses, teachers, children, and that's pretty good. So let's pause there. Then we have the fourth category, which is they're negative, and we don't give them any power. We don't like these people. These are deviants, which Schneider would say. This is what our board looks like. So now we've got deviants. What's a group that we don't like and we don't give them any power? Okay, criminals. Refugees, yes. No power. And we can't like them that much because we put them on islands and they're stuck in hotel rooms and for decades. So it can't be that we love them, but we abandon them, right? These are people that are abandoned by society, right? So there's some degree to which that the social construction delivers unto them a status in society, a relationship with the state that denies them their full humanity. So you end up with that. So we have criminals, refugees. I'm going to put down, I know this isn't true anymore, so I'm going to sort of move them around a little bit, but gays. Like it used to be that if you were gay, you had HIV/AIDS. So this is a social construction that's changed, where you started and it's shifted over time. And we're going to talk about 3 ways in which social constructions change. The policy image of the group changes over time. So I'm going to put gays sort of over here by police under halfway between contenders and deviants and dependents, because they're probably dependent now, right? We like them, but we don't give them any power, right? There's no gay prime minister. There's no gay cabinet member. They're at least in the that we know of, that I know of, at the federal level. But so you've got a status issue where the social construction dictates the status of the group and their relationship with the state. Does that make sense? So our board looks like this. And you can draw along with the board, and I'll take a picture of it and post it up to onto Canvas. But let's keep working the board a little bit more. So we've got advantaged, contenders, dependents, and deviants. And there's 2 questions that sort of come out of this for me. One is, I'm going to write this down here in the bottom. How does policy change happen? Right? So 1, policy change. And 2 is a question about the way we allocate benefits and burdens to people within those categories, right? So benefits and burdens. So that's what I've written down here. Policy change and then benefits and burdens. So let's ask the question, what would you give here's the way I want to ask it. We're going to go to advantage now, and we're going to ask if they get real benefits or symbolic benefits, and real burdens or symbolic burdens. Okay, does that make sense? So it'll be, I'll use a blue marker now, and we'll do real benefits, real burdens, symbolic benefits, symbolic burdens. Okay. So what's the answer to the question for the advantaged? Do advantaged people get real benefits? And do they get real burdens? I think we can say that they get real benefits. So these get real benefits. Do they get burdens? Maybe symbolic burdens, right? Like taxes as a symbolic burden to someone who makes $100 million a year, right? Oh, under contender, we could have put Jeff Bezos. I know we weren't using names, but let's use Amazon. Amazon. So now we're looking at real or symbolic. So we're going to say real benefits. Real benefits. What about contenders? So that's our real benefits right here. What about contenders? What did they get? God, I hope you can read my handwriting. What did they get? What if I said to you that contenders get symbolic burdens? That's what a fine applies to big business. I mean, how many people went to jail for the global financial crisis? Like 4? How many people went to jail for other stock market crashes or sort of abhorrent, not as many people as go to jail for crack cocaine or pot or pills at festivals or any of this stuff. So we're talking about symbolic burdens when it comes to contenders. These people that remember that we don't like, but they have a lot of power. So they have symbolic burdens. So what we're doing is looking at the distribution of public policy, the distributive nature of public policy based on a social construction of a group. So group is socially constructed as positive, and they get a distributive policy of real benefits. They're constructed as negative, but they still have a lot of power, so they get symbolic burdens. What about dependents, right? These nurses, teachers, children, who, what do they get? Do they get real burdens, symbolic burdens, real benefits, symbolic benefits? Schneider and Ingram are going to argue that they get symbolic benefits. We give them awards, make them Australian of the Year, or New South Wales Person of the Year. And so they get symbolic benefits. So you see what we've got here so far? We've got real benefits, symbolic burdens. We got real benefits, symbolic burdens, symbolic benefits. What does that leave? Real burdens for deviants. So they're going to end up coming down as real burdens. And that marker is leaking. So that's how we ended up with that. So now we've got, remember, advantaged, celebrities, military, doctors, actors, sports get real benefits. Contenders, big business, Amazon, newspapers, media, um, mining companies, police, symbolic burdens, dependents, nurses, teachers, children, symbolic benefits, and criminals, refugees, these deviants get real burdens. So that, in a nutshell, is the social construction of target populations. And I want you to begin to sort of see the world as social constructions. Are they receiving benefits or burdens? Are they advantage, contender, dependent, or deviant? We're going to keep doing this as an exercise in class. So we had two questions. One was policy change, and the second was benefits and burdens. And we just went over benefits and burdens. So let's look at policy change now. And there are three ways that you end up with policy change under social construction of target populations. The first is that someone with power comes over from wherever they are and pulls you over. So remember the example of gays? So there were a bunch of celebrities that came out or would come and be supportive of HIV/AIDS. And that helped change the policy image for a socially constructed group that was seen as deviant, and pulled it from a deviant position over into a dependent box. So it went from deviant over to dependent. And so now gays are kind of here. Okay. And I know that we're doing better today, that gay people are perceived more positively today, but I'm talking about historically over the last 30 years. So there's that. So then the second is, let me pull up my slide. Sorry. Policy change occurs when a policy overreaction happens. If you take one of these groups, like refugees or criminals, and you treat them so badly. I mean, we've sort of been waiting for this, right? That what is too long? Is a decade too long in detention? Like, when will Australians hit a threshold for which keeping people in detention when they're not criminals doesn't sit well with them? And we've been waiting for it, and we haven't hit it. But that's the policy overreaction that would, when that happens, and that will happen, then that policy overreaction is an example of policy change through social construction of target populations. The policy image changes because the overreaction shifts public sentiment toward that group from negative to positive, right? They become sympathetic. Gays became sympathetic. IV drug users have become sympathetic. We've switched from drug reform, locking up drug users, to putting them in a dependent category, and they become drug addicts. And the language that we use reflects a new narrative that reflects the social construction of target populations that is indicative of public sentiment, again, across two axes: positive or negative perception and power. So we see people shift from being seen as drug abusers or users to addicts who need help and should be treated by the medical system as opposed to by the legal system or the judicial system. So that becomes a really big deal. Okay. Now, the third is when there's competition between venues. In here, you might see like the courts get involved or a TV show get involved. And we think of this as like the Will and Grace example, where it like boosted, where it boosted gay rights, right? By having, I think it's the smell of the markers that putting me asleep. So like the Will and Grace, or think of Euphoria right now and sort of the impact it's having on people's perceptions of drug use. There are lots of different ways in which movies and TV shows have an effect to, again, change the policy image. So you change it by having an advantaged actor who intervenes, like celebrities. You have it when there's a policy overreaction and it shifts from a negative sentiment to a positive sentiment, and people seem more sympathetic. And you have it when there's a competition between venues. Maybe a court strikes down a ruling. Maybe a TV show comes up with a new concept, and it changes the way the public looks at an issue. Those three are the three ways that policy change happens in the social construction of target populations. Okay, great. You're doing great. You're doing excellent. We're 36 minutes in, and on YouTube in the middle of a rainstorm, and we've got a full figured out chart here for looking at social construction of target populations. So let's look. I just want to go to my slides for a moment, and I'm on slide 19. And I just want to note again that there are four key assumptions. Problems are not problems until they're socially constructed. Construction allocates membership or resources proportionally. Social construction informs future policies. So there's path dependency and there's degenerative policy. Now, what degenerative policy means is that if you have a policy for a group that has moved, like gays, but it's still negative, even though they're seen as positive, it's still negative. The policy still treats them wrong, even though, so marriage equality would have been an example. That's what's referred to as a degenerative policy, right? And we see this with trans people, right? That they're singled out and discriminated against. Even though I think there is quite a lot of publicly positive sentiment toward the trans community. And I think that's true. But at the same time, there are a lot of negative laws and policies that affect trans people. And as a result, those are degenerative. So there's a difference between the two. Okay. So let's now look at, let's go back to the slides. And we looked at how policy change occurs. That's great. So the key points, one more time, are that it provides a different way of looking at the policy process and policy making. This is the distributive model. This is not about what goes into the policy. This is what comes out of the policy. This is not about how interest group activities achieve policies. It's about how policies impact the behavior of citizens and what comes out of the policy. So it shapes public behavior. Moral panics are a good example, and we'll spend a week talking about moral panics as a good example of related to the social construction of target population. And policies are designed to give certain people a positive notion of government and influence through the money they get, the time afforded to them, in positive construction. So what I mean when I say that there is a relationship between the state and the individual, I mean there is an unfair relationship between the state and the individual. Some people are treated better. White males, cis are treated much better under this system. The system is designed to create relationships. Who are these people? Most of these people who are high power, these are all white people. And most of these people down here, these are all communities of color. So when we look at the relationship that's created between the individual and the state, we're talking about a very unfair, very racist, very sexist, very transphobic, very homophobic system that is delivering a distributive model that reproduces systems of oppression against people. Okay? Okay. Now I want to focus on intersectionality because I've got 20 minutes left. And what I want to say here is that intersectionality is not a psychological theory. I'm on slide 21. It is a lens with which to view the way people organize themselves. So it is not sort of a master, strategy about identity politics and how white people need to be criticized. That is not what intersectionality is about. What intersectionality is about is three things. Let me go to my slide. I'm losing my slides. One, systems and structures render people vulnerable at the intersection of their identities. This is the very basic idea that if you are Black and a woman, the problem cannot be solved by only dealing with you as a woman. That if you ignore the fact that the policy also has an impact on the basis of race, that if you ignore that fact, then you are not able to deal with the public policy itself. The second is that intersectionality is fundamentally reconstitutive of the individual. So it's not essentialized, right? Essentialized would mean that people are their parts, like I am my arm and my hand and my head and my ears, and I'm not a person. I'm not my body. I am my ears. And that's an essentialist view of personhood. And intersectionality says that you're fundamentally reconstitutive. Your identities are like your body, and they're all connected and all part of it. And you can't separate one from the other. You can't take my ear off and deal with me on the basis of my ear, right? Any more than you can sort of pick people apart on the basis of their disability or on their sexuality or on their gender or on their religion or on their race. Okay. And the third point is that you cannot solve policy problems without dealing with people at the intersection of their identities. The problems cannot be solved. You can't solve the problem. The problem cannot be solved. You can't solve the problem. I cannot solve the problem of gendered violence in Aboriginal communities without dealing with race. Can't do it. I cannot solve the problem of chemsex without dealing with sexuality, right? That is not simply a function of I don't know what the user, not user disposition, but user use, or there is an element related to the queer community that contributes to that as a social problem. So anyway, so those are the three issues: that it's that people are rendered vulnerable at the intersection of their identities. It's fundamentally reconstitutive. You cannot take someone apart and essentialize them down. And then what ends up happening is they're turned into a hierarchy of identity. So we take you apart, and then we decide which parts of you are the most important. So for women, we're going to look at you're not going to look at your elbow, we're going to look at your breasts, right? Or we're going to look at something else. And that sort of essentializing of women is both sexist and creates a power dynamic that is designed to render them vulnerable, again, at the intersection of their identities. So women but they're not essentialized, they're fundamentally reconstitutive. And public policy cannot be solved without dealing with people at the intersection of these identities. Okay, so those are our three things. So let's keep moving through the slides here. Now I'm on slide 23. And I note that we are people, we have fluid, heterogeneous identities. We cannot be reduced, as I was saying, down to one facet of our identity. We may be white male with mental health disability, Black female and straight, or Asian transgender and straight, for instance. We exist as all of these things at the same time. The intersection of these identities presents particularly intense or acute oppressions and particularly beneficial privileges. Oppression occurs more acutely at the intersection of marginalized identities. So then this third point, sorry, I'm reading really small lettering. This is important. There is an ordered hierarchy of respectable, socially constructed identities in society. And these are prioritized. As a result, policies, laws, social conventions are designed in ways that give power, benefits and burdens, that give power back to the ordered top identities in intersections of identity. So what we were saying about symbolic benefits, real benefits, symbolic burdens, real burdens, has a real life impact when you meet at the intersection of these identities, right? You are being rendered vulnerable in such a way that you are burdened by society, that this relationship that's created between you and the state is designed for you to be vulnerable and subject to the control of the state, which is different than what a privileged person might experience, right? When they walk down the street, there's the meme, walking while black or driving while black or, any of these, breathing, like any of these things that happens that are sort of singled out on the basis of identity. So let's keep looking here. So people are particularly oppressed, I'm on slide 24. At these intersections of identity, things get worse for women who are disabled on the basis of being both woman and disabled. And you cannot relieve the struggles that people face by dealing with one and not the other. As a result, there is a preferred list of identities that people like to talk about. So not only does society ignore that people are multidimensional, but it then picks which identities they want to talk about. For instance, class, being poor, is often ignored, as is mental health or domestic violence. So these identities are put aside, even though a person who's bipolar cannot be helped without addressing both. So then I've got just a couple more things I want to say here. So this sets up and establishes a hierarchy of identity that both privileges certain groups and the way identities are talked about, the way that they're talked about, the discursive manner in which they're talked about, in order to give power back to those in power. So for instance, the media doesn't talk about mental illness because it makes people feel uncomfortable. And we don't, that sounds to me like the second face of power, right? Covert power. Keep something off the agenda. And we don't talk about poverty too much because it makes people who are not poor feel uncomfortable, right? We shouldn't talk about money. And we talk about gay people through sex or fashion because it's understandable in those terms. And then gay people talk about themselves through sex and fashion, which is the third face of power. When you choose something that will ultimately harm you, when you reduce yourself down to a stereotype that will ultimately harm you, when you've taken a reductionist point of view and you just say everything is nice shoes or great haircut or whatever it is, that's a third face of power, where you've convinced someone that they're no better than their shoes. And television talks about surgeries for trans people because that's the way we want to consider their identity, as a medical operation rather than a sense of self. So that's something to think about. And let me just look at my clock. Okay, we're at 50 minutes and 57 seconds. What I'm going to do is just note that, because I think that was a lot of data. I think that was a lot of information. We did 40 minutes on social construction of target populations and 10 minutes on intersectionality. I could do another 20 minutes on intersectionality. But what I'd like to do is note that in the slides, there is an experiment that I ran with Dr. Tom Winter, who went here to Sydney Uni, and we looked at emotional taxation and the way in which, as an experiment to test intersectionality, and it basically said, let's look at surveying cis people, trans people of color, and seeing what their emotional experience is as they walk through queer activism. And what we found was that at the intersection of identities, their experience was qualitatively different. They had a harder time of it. They experienced more emotional taxation. Let me see if I've got a definition right here of emotional taxation. Emotional taxation is defined as the emotional cost, intentional or not, that a policy, program, or scheme places on an individual or group for entering into the political process or addressing a political issue. The impact of the emotional tax, the level of taxation to enter the policy process, is relative to three variables: to an individual or group's political power, which we just looked at right here, right? Level of political power. Let's see. Individual group's political power or degree of stigma, capacity to pay the cost, and collective support. So if a group of people was going to go do something together, that might mean that they were more likely to do it, or that they'd be more supportive or feel more supported emotionally. And as you click through those slides, number 26, 27, 28, you're going to see that for trans people of color, and this was done across 4 countries, so the data is robust. The lived experience was much harder for them across the 4 countries. So with that in mind, I would like to stop, but I'm going to note that you have got your policy brief next week. And what are you going to do? You're going to do 2 things. You're going to come up with an issue that you're going to work on and a location, and you're going to bring that with you, and we're going to workshop that in next week's class. If you have any questions, send me an email. Thank you so much. Have a great week. I'll see you in the seminar in an hour and a half. Thank you very much.